Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masech the Zevachim daf Kuf Tes Vav. We are going to begin as a review on Kuf Yud Dalid Amud Beis, where it says Oyloisehem v'Shalmehen. So this goes back to our very lengthy Mishnah, which says that if you have a situation of Mechusar Zman, Bein Begufo, Bein Bebalov, so it said that it doesn't make any difference if it's the carbon itself is Mechusar Zman, or there's something inherently wrong with the person who's bringing the carbon. Eiz Mechusar Zman bebalov. So what is the situation the Mishnah says where the person is Mechusar Zman? Hazav Yeldas Matzayra. So in all these situations, they are currently tamei, but eventually they will become tahar. In those situations, shekru v'chatasa v'ashamam b'chutz b'turin. If they would be makriv their karbanos outside, then they're pater, because they were not allowed to have brought those karbanos bifnim. So therefore they're pater. However, the Mishnah says, Oyloisehem v'shalmein b'chutz chayavin. Now when it comes to the same person who is mechusar zman begufo, bebalov, nonetheless, if he brings an oil or shlomim outside, so he's also going to be chayv. And on this, the Gemara says, "V'hani b'nei shlomim ninhu." So Rav Sheshis tini nazir b'hadaihu, which means we're talking about the shalmei nazir. So in the case where the nazir who brings a shlomim, titaka will be chayv, even though he's mechusar zman beguf b'balov. The Ziri Kavua Tanoi, Rav Sheshis Lu Kavua Tanoi. Rav Chilkia Rav Tuvi. Lo Shonu, the only time we said that if you have someone who's Mechusar Zman and he brings, let's say, his chatas outside, that he's going to be potter, is Lo Shonu El Lishmo. That's when his intention was to bring it for that carbon. Then he would be potter. However, interestingly enough, if let's say he wanted it for a different thing, right? So then, for example, like for an ola, so then even though it was, let's say it was really an asham, so we say that you're going to be chayiv. So in the event that, again, as Rashi says, this actually works, as Rashi says, the whole Zevachim so we saw the very beginning of this Masechta a long time ago that even though it's not considered to be oil l'shem chayiva, but it is a kosher carbon. So interestingly enough, if you have, for example, a asham, at least according to that shita, and you have it shalol shma for the sake of an oila, so there, if you did that b'chutz you b'chayim because bifnim would be kosher. So Yehachi l'shmo nami nechayim hoyol v'roi l'shlo l'shmo bifnim. So why don't we say hoyol? That since shlo l'shmo bifnim, you be chayiv. It has some power. So therefore b'chutz should be chayiv. So then maybe also if you bring it for the sake of an asham, you should say the same thing. You should be chayiv. The answer is boy akira. In other words, one needs to specifically change it from an asham to an oila. It needs an akira. And that's the reason why it would not work once it was lishmo. But and therefore, without an akira, the carbon by default is an asham lishmo, and therefore an asham lifnei zmanoi is not roy lavo bifnim. So that's the answer. So on this, as we saw this already, it's kind of counterintuitive. How is it possible that if I do things wrong, in other words, I have an oila and I have shalol shma intentions that I'm bringing it for the sake, not instead of an asham as an oila, so then we say b'chutz you're going to be chayiv. So because it has more power than if you actually, it's an asham and your intention was for an asham, b'chutz should be potter. How do we see that? It doesn't make sense. Why would shalol lishma have more power than lishma? So Gemara says, "V'lo b'har Pesach," and again, we did see this yesterday, but we know that this is true when it comes to a Karban Pesach. There's 2 times that a Karban Pesach can be brought, at the right time and at the wrong time. B'shar Yemos Hashana, if it was done any other time of the year, or even before Chatzos, on the 14th, the Edu Kosher, Lishmoi. If you have intention in the middle of February, I'm going to bring this Karban Pesach, and it's a Karban Pesach, but it's February, it's not anywhere near the right time, so it's not good. However, the Kosher Shelo Shema. But if, let's say, you have a Karban Pesach, and in February you say, I want this to be a Shlomim, so then that actually works. So we see that Shelo L'Shma is better than L'Shma. Says, no, Pesach B'Shar Yemos Hashanah Shlomim Ninhu. The reality is, it's not necessarily because Shelo L'Shma is better, it's just that a Karban Pesach takes upon itself the status as a Shlomim all the other times of the year. So Lema Messiah. Let's say that we actually are going to have support to Rav Chilkiah, that again makes a distinction between L'Shma and Shelo L'Shma, whether you're Chai B'chutz. It says like this: you would think that I would also exclude from the pasuk Vel Pesach that maybe you would not be chayiv chutz regarding an oil which is mechusar bal zman babal. For example, you have a yoledes and matzayra, so they're not fit to be able to bring lifnim in the proper way. V'ashim nozer v'ashim matzayra, and so too when it comes to an ashim Nazir and Ashim Mitzayra, where there's a psul. The Gemara is going to explain what that is. Talmud Loimer Shor Mikol Makom, Kasev Mikol Makom, Eiz Mikol Makom. So it's basically saying that Shchuti Chutz applies in all situations, including in these situations, and therefore we're not going to exclude when it comes to Mechusar Zman Babalim, when it comes to an oila, which is mechusar zman babalim. Now the ilu chatas shaira. However, when it comes to a chatas, it does include, it removes it. In other words, it's not included in the chiyuv. But my skin and ilim bezmanoi, that it was being brought at the right time. So my ashim I feel chatas nami. Then the din should be the same thing. There should be no difference between a chatas and an ashim. El shlo zmanoi. It means that it was not done at the right time, because this person is mechusar zman. So, ubamai, what are we talking about? If he had the intention for it to be brought as an asham b'chutz, so asham my chayiv. Why would you be chayiv? Right? Because it's not something which is fit lifnim. Elav shelo l'shmoi. It must be. It's telling you, and this is the raya that we're talking about. You had an asham, but you had the intention shelo l'shma that should be an oila, and therefore, since it would work bifnim, so therefore b'chutz you're chayiv. So that's the right. Right? It says oilam bizmanoi v'shelo l'shmoi. Really, we're talking about it is the right time, and it was shelo l'shma. Again, it was asham for the sake of an oila, but it was at the right time. Rabbi Lezer he the oimer makdishin asham l'chatas atanan tafel v'huadin ikr. So actually, according to the Shita, he says that if you're makdish an asham for a chatas, and he learns the kefil, and so too when it comes to the ikr. So look at Rashi. V'suloi u'memela shelo l'shma de'ukma koi. Okay, so it's not necessarily a raya. Tashma. Yachol shani mar ba'oilos mechusar zman megufa. I would think that it would include there to be a chiv of shchuti chutz. If a person would take an oila and your mechusar zman, namely that you again are mitzayra, your tummy now, but tomorrow, begufa, or let's say we're talking about the carbon is less than 8 days old. The chatas ben begufa ben bebayilim talmud lemer b'pesach ol moed. Kosher royal b'pesach ol moed and chayav. As you said, your only chayav b'chutz is if you could have brought it b'fnim. However, il asham, when it comes to an asham shire, we remove it, and therefore when it comes to the asham, no, you're not going to be chayav b'chutz. So b'maskin ilim l'shmoi, if it was done l'shmo, so asham nami liftery, maybe it should be potter also. Shelo l'shmoi, that it was not for the sake of a chatas. but rather for a different carbon. Oilam shlosh shma. Rabbi Lezi de makish osham achatos tan ikar v'kol shekein l'tafel. Tashma the chiyas Rav Dimi oimer tana debe Rav Livoi yochashen moitzi af oilos mechusers man b'bailim. I would think to exclude and to say that you would be potter when it comes to a person who is mechusers man. Asham nozer v'asham etzayr as well. Menayin v'natzavu tamidul lachai v'lo yadana my Talmuda, some Ravina, Shor Mikol Makom, Kasna Mikol Makom, Eiz Mikol Makom, which is all inclusive, you be chayv in all these cases. So Hamani, Rami Kida. So what are you gonna say? Kida Amrit, just like we said before. Rab Nachman Mishnah Rami Tana de Rabbi Loi, the Tani Levi Asham Nazir v'Asham Etzayra Shishachtan Shalosh Shman. If you shechted these things without the right intention for it to be for an asham, ksherin, and therefore for that reason, b'chutz you're going to be chayiv. Shachtim b'chutz zman b'balam, o shahayu b'nei shtei shanim. Let's say it's already too old. The shachtan, it says psulin. So actually, this is a kasha, right? If it's pasul on the inside, so it would be patur on the outside. But we said before you're chayiv. Umeshani Rabdimi Lukashi kan lishma kan shelo lishmoi. If it was lishmo, then you're potter. If it was lishmo, you're potter. Shelo lishmo, you're chayiv, because shelo lishmoi inside, it would be oilish. It would be kosher. Ravashi Romi, he has a contradiction. Masnisin abarisa between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Mishani kan lishmo kan shalishmo. Lema tiavte tiavte Rav Huna. Amlocha Rav Huna hachamay again shefer shtei ashamos achrayis. Let's say you're mafresh 2 karbanis as an asham and as achrayis. That just in case I lose one, then the other one is going to be the asham. The chad menayu miikara oiluhi. That even from the onset, it was already an oilah. Because it's not shaykh, since you only have two ashams, one of them is already an oila, and therefore it's considered to be roy lavav nim, because it's already considered to be an oila. Okay, and that is oilahi. As we continue Talmud Beis, kid Rav Huna and Marav, Rav Huna and Marav, asham shenita kor'iyah. If you have a carbon asham that was supposed to be grazing, in order for it to get a blemish, then you would sell it, then eventually became some back for an oila. V'shachdu stam kashul oil. You shachted it, then it's kosher for an oil, because at the end of the day, it was going to be used for that sake anyway as an oil, so therefore it's kosher. Okay. Let's see, maybe we have a question here. Asham mechusar zman sheshachdu b'chutz matai pater l'kuliyam. So if it's lishmo, then it's potter. The machlokus is if it was shelo lishmoi, right? You had the situation of a person who's mechusar zman, and he shechted an asham for the sake of an oila. So in that situation, it's a machlokus whether it's considered royal nim. However, as we just saw, if you're mafer shtei ashamois lachrayis, then everyone's going to say you're chayiv, because that definitely is roy. Okay. So that case, kigoyin shehifer shtei hashamos achrayis tachad mana miikara oilhi. So this you would be chayiv l'kuli alma, and that is TA5. Okay. Let's see, maybe another question. TB7. A chayvais begilgal. All right. So hamala mebasar chatas v'chu. So let's go back to the Mishnah, about 4 blot back. So it says, if a person takes from the basar of the chatas, from the basar and asham, from the basar kachim kachim or basar kachim kalim, or the leftovers of the oimer, or the shtei lechem, lechem apanim, the shiri menachos, v'hayutzik v'hapaises, one who pours oil or crumbles the mincha, v'boilel, who mixes it, v'hamoilech, and salts, and made of a magish, u'masadas, a shulchan, u'meitiv, a sanedis, and all these things are done b'chutz. Potter. So all these things should be potter. Vein chayav love lo mishum zarus, lo mishum tuma, lo mishum achos begadim, lo mishum shelo rachos yadayim v'raglayim. Okay, so let's continue with the Gemara. Tanaban menayin limal mabasa chatas mabasa hasham. How do we know that all these cases based on the Mishnah can be potter, b'chutz? So how do we know if you sacrifice on the bus of the chatas, on ashim, mabasa kachim, or if it's mabasar kadashim kalim, mabasar oimer, shnei lechem, lechem papanim, misher manachos, shapater, taman oimer, oil. Ma oil she royal ha'Allah. It's only like a carbon oil that's fit to be brought inside, that if you would bring it outside to be chayiv. So af, also here, only kol ha'royal ha'Allah, only something which is fit to be brought up. However, excluding all these other things that are not fit l'hoilah. Okay. Fine. So menayin shaf hayotzek v'boila v'paises v'malech meni magish masader shulchan u'meitiv as the neres of v'kaimitz and v'kabel b'chutz shapater, which is we saw in the Mishnah that all these other cases shapater tamudomer asher yala oila oy zavach ma ha'Allah shehi gamar voida. It's only the completion of the avoda of kol shehu gamar voida. It's only, as Rashi says, she'ein achareha avoida. There's nothing after it. However, this Rabbalahu ba'af kol koil could go to menasech umakdir kataris umakdir kmotzim umakdir minchas kohanim. So it depends if there's a gemara voida or not. Ad shel hukam mishkan. So now the Mishnah goes through the different stages that before the Mishkan was established. So bamos were allowed, and the avoda was with the bechor, with the firstborn. However, once the Mishkan came about in the Midbar, so then Nesru Habamais, there was an Isser of Shchuti Chutz, you couldn't have a Bama, Ve'avoda b'Kohanim, and the Kohanim were the ones that did the Avoda. Kadshi Kadashim had to be eaten with name in a Klayim, and the Kadashim Kalim in all of Machni Yisrael. Okay, so says the Gemara, so Zosar Rav Huna Bar Rav Katina Kamed Rav Chista. The Kakari, and he read the following pasuk. It says, "V'yishlach has nari b'nei Yisrael," that he sent out the lads. So Amalei Hachi Omer Ravasi Karvu Pasku Savar Lo'isvim Masnisin. So basically, the question is, how do we darshan this pasuk? Says Rashi, Oiso Hayoim. On that day, Pasku Avoida Min HaBechayris. The avoda was removed from the firstborn. Shemesinai Nitztava al Kahuna. From the time of Har Sinai, the Kohanim are the one who will do the avoda. V'shimshu nadav avihu kol oisa shana rishayna. Nadav avihu worked that whole year. Ad shokam mishkan umesu. And once the Mishkan was built, then unfortunately that was when the tragedy was that they died. So on this he says, "Upasku several oisvim masnisin sham nekamer mishmei Ravad Barava oila shekirav Yisrael b'midbar." When it came to the karbanos that were brought in the midbar, eno tuuna hefshem nituach. It didn't require hefshem nituach, the splitting or the removing of the skins. Oisvim b'reisa de shavu b'kulu detani achol hukam mishkan habamos mutaris yavoda b'bechayris, which is what we saw in our Mishnah. And was able to makrib a behema chaya and oif, male or female, timimim, they had to be tamim, or bali mumin tahirin, could be a blemish, but they had to be tahar. Avul tameyin, you can't be makrib even then non-kosher animals. Vakoyel karbu oilus. In the midbar, we were makrib carbon oilus. Va'oil shekrivi yisrael midbar. Actually, it's not true. We see over here that there was a requirement of hefshim in tuach. So tanahi taket zamachofas tanaim with regard to the din of hefshim in tuach. The sign of igama kohanim hanigashim el Hashem nis kadoshu. They came close. So Rabbi Shimon Karchoimer zu precious b'choides. This is referring to the separation of the firstborn. Rabbi Yomi zu precious nadav avihu. This is separation of an avihu. because after their death. Bishul my name is Uprishos Nadabavihu Hananusiv Hu Asher Dibra Hashem Lamor Bikroive at Kadesh. From those who came close, they sanctified because they died. Elomad Yermizu Precious Bukhairis Hecha Ramiza. How do we see this in the Psukim? The says Vanoati Sham Levnei Israel Nikdash Bichvoidi. It says I was sanctified by my honor. Al Tikri Bichvoidi Ella Bim Choiv Doi, for those who honor me. So what does that mean? So that's referring to says Rashi, Nemruloi Lamoisha B'Yom Shinistavo Al Malachas Mishkan of Remez Loi Shibayim Shiyishra Shchina Al Habayis is Kadesh Bichvoidav. For Nirmos Lahavin Mahu Anshemesu. No one knew how God was going to be sanctified until they died. Okay. Davar Zamar Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. Lo Yadu Ad Shemesu B'nei Aaron. They didn't know until none of you died. B'kivan Shemesu B'nei Aaron. Amar Aaron Achi. Aaron my brother Lo Mesu. B'necha. Your children didn't die. Ella L'Hakdish Shmo Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kivan Sheyada Aaron Shebanav Yadua Makom Hein Shasak. So Aaron was silent. He kibel schar, for he was received reward for his silence. Number of Yidam Aaron is quiet. V'chein b'David Oimer Daimla Hashem v'tis choylelo Aval bil shemapel chalchalom chalolim es at shatuk. So even though he saw much terrible destruction, nonetheless he was silent. Says Rashi, V'yidam Aaron hari sheshasak v'kibel schar. So shemetoich kach zachav v'nis yachid alav hadibor, that Hashem was designated him. Shnemer achar oiso inyan parshas stu yayin v'huskar b'oiso dibor Moshe el Aharon. So it wasn't just Aharon that was silent. We also find this by David HaMelech. V'chein b'shlomo hu oimer eis lachshais v'eis l'daber. There's a time to be silent. There's a time to speak. Pamim sheshaisek mekabel sachar al shtika. Pamim medaber mekabel sachar al dibor. Sometimes by being silent you get reward. Sometimes by speaking you get reward. Those who are mikadesh. B'shah she'es HaKadosh Baruch Hu din b'kedushav misyara u'mis'alwa mishalel el kasha oila. So nonetheless, when we said all this, but still, it's a kasha and an oila. Says Rashi, what's the whole kasha? Diktani, because we learned hacha the tuna hashim netuach. So did it require hashim netuach in the midbar or not? So that's the question that we're still not so sure of. Trey Tanoihi. So it's a machos Tanoim. The San Yerbishmol Aimer close, then Rabbi Pratos Bol Moed. The general rules were said at Har Sinai and the Pratos were said later at Oil Moed. Rabbi Kiva Aimer close to Paratois, never Sinai. Vinish the Bol Moed. It was repeated. The Mishtal Shibarvas Moed. Omer Mar. Okay, we're going to stop there. Okay, let's stop there, but maybe there's another question. Maybe. Start off with question. What did we see so far? What did we see in today's daf? Question 3. Heichem mishkachas lo carbon sheinu kashul shmo kashul shloshmai. So we kind of did that. And asham the mechusar zman bebalim can go in asham nazim and sar shlotak zmanam. Question 4. Matai kufreshu kohanim lavoida tachas abachayris. So one says when they went to Har Sinai. The other one says it's kushuhukam mishkan. So it's either when the Mishkan was erected or it was at Har Sinai. Okay. Question TA 5 we already did. Asham mechusar zman sheshachta mechutz. So Motai Potter Lakuli Alma, definitely If it's Lishmoi, if it's Sholishmos Machlokas, if you're Mafresh Shnei Hashamos Achrayas, then everyone holds your Chayiv because that's something which is royal Lifnim. TA6. No. TB8. No. Question TB7. Hashaykhet Chayvais Begilgal Laikil Rav Shimon Mishum My Lucky. We had that a while ago. Hakaimitz B'chutz Im Chayiv Umadua. Hakaimitz B'chutz Im Potter Im Chayiv Umadua. So we had over here Yoitze Bob Heises Moyag made him Magasadu as a Shochan Neres Uvakaimitz, right? Vakaimitz Mikabel B'chutz your Potter Talmud Leimer Asher Yal Oilo Zavach Ma Allah Shehu Gemar Voida Akol Shehu Gemar Voida. So this is not considered to be a Gemar Voida, so you'd be Potter. That's TB8. So in fact, your Potter Shekamitza Eino Gemar Voida. Adkan.